Hey, welcome to Socialism for All. This is S4A Livestream number 67, being recorded on November 30, 2022. So we have about 24 people in the chat, and we've been chatting for a few minutes now, and it seemed like time to start the recording. So all I really have planned for today is to read another article about organizing unemployed workers. So we covered that in the last video, and I want to continue today. The last article was about CPUSA back in the 30s and the unemployed councils in the United States. This article is more about the UK. And so we can get, perspective from another country, about the same topic. So that should be interesting. Otherwise, just kind of free chat today. And, as far as any COVID updates, we're not going to be going into that in depth. However, if you check Biobot, biobot.io/data. You can find the wastewater data, and of course, the COVID curve is going up currently. It's not in a steep climb, but it is going up. COVID is not over. Don't let anybody tell you that it is. Keep masking, and specifically wear an N95, KN95, N99 or P100. You need actual protection from this virus. It's a lot more than just the threat of dying from pneumonia in the first month. It can cause massive organ damage throughout major organs: your heart, your liver, your kidneys, your gut, your brain and nervous system, including basically causing brain damage and rapid aging of the brain, equivalent to like a decade's worth of aging from even a mild or moderate symptomatic infection. So keep that in mind. Even if it's mild, it's like a cold. Yeah, your brain doesn't feel that way. There was a study we've covered several times that basically showed that mild to moderate cases of COVID, like the apparent symptoms, caused brain shrinkage and overall loss of mass in the brain. And some of that shrinkage was focused in certain centers of the brain involved in memory and things like that. So you don't want to get COVID. You need to wear a real mask to do it. Also get your booster shots and all that kind of thing. But anyway, so enough about that. Let us, before we get into anything else, thank the patrons whose names are on the screen, and this was updated this morning. So yeah, patreon.com/socialism for all. You can get your name on the screen for as little as $2 a month or more. I would make content even if nobody supported, but the support allows me to regularly devote a significant amount of time to this, and I wouldn't be able to do it without that support. It's encouraging, it's materially helpful, and again, it makes up for lost hours doing other things. So I really appreciate that support. And this has been a light month. I had some increased duties, obligations, and responsibilities in other areas of my life. However, I am trying to make up for it. Well, first of all, we've been doing like 4 hours of streaming every week, except for last week when I had to, it was a holiday in the U.S., Thanksgiving. So, I had to eat a lot of food, and, not going to stream then. However, we did recently start a new series, the Housing Industrial Complex, or Homeless Industrial Complex Syllabus. And just today I was working on readings for that. And I have a number of other short audiobooks from Thomas Sankara and Alexandra Kollontai and others that I'm trying to get up on the channel. Like I said, I've just been really kind of unusually pressed for time this month, and so I haven't been able to get as much stuff up. However, I always make up for it somewhere. This happens from time to time. I think like back in May of this year, I didn't post anything for like 10 days straight, and then I kind of had like a burst later on. So, sometimes it's steady, sometimes it ebbs and flows, but we eventually make up for it. Anyway, all that support is much appreciated, and expect some more audiobooks coming soon there. So thanks, patrons. And if you like this stream, thank a patron. Consider becoming one yourself if you can afford it. All right. And I will add, because we don't run any ads or sponsorships on the channel, and we want to keep it that way. So, all right. Now, what were we talking about here in the chat? Before we'll close out more like with today's reading. We just want to do some chatting first. And hopefully, everybody who did experience a holiday this weekend is better off for it and not more stressed out. That can sometimes happen with the holidays. But, if that's you, take a deep breath, and, you're not alone in that. I do actually feel, although I did sort of overwork for a couple of days, I feel like I came out of it overall with something of a reset head, I guess, which now that I'm sitting down and talking here about it, I hadn't realized it before, but I'm realizing it now. So I guess that's good. And hopefully, people got some good food. I know times are tough in 2022, and a lot of people really aren't able to, have the feast that they would like to have. But whatever you did, hopefully it was satisfying. And, and if not, I mean, you can have your feast at some point, hopefully. So, all right, where were we? So there's a question about thoughts on news of Paxlovid. That is the drug that is effective in people 65 and older, age 65 and older, for helping to reduce the risk of hospitalization from COVID. Thoughts on news of Paxlovid being a treatment possibly for long COVID. And I was asking if there was a study about that, or, I don't know. I had read anecdotally, and we've covered on the channel, that some long COVID researchers who also had long COVID got their hands on Paxlovid prescriptions and were trying it out, and they seemed to get a temporary alleviation of some of the long COVID symptoms. My understanding of Paxlovid, it's two drugs put together, is that that drug cocktail is kind of rough on the body, and that has contributed to the fact that you only take it for 5 days at a time. I think that's part of the reason it's not taken for longer, is that it is kind of rough. Just drugs sometimes can be effective, but they can also be somewhat toxic. So anyway, that's my understanding there, is it can't be really taken long term. I could be wrong about that. So I haven't seen any studies on Paxlovid being a treatment, just a few anecdotal experiments. I don't even know if it's a hypothesis or like if there's much support for that hypothesis at this point. Somebody else says, love the homelessness series you put up. Having a comb through that for more ideas. We definitely have a large homeless population to work with in my area. And I was saying about that, this has been a feature of the neoliberal era since the late 70s in general, when there were major structural changes in the U.S. economy, deindustrialization, a lot of jobs being shipped to other countries for, basically where capitalists could pay lower wages, and also dismantling of the social safety net and public programs and assistance and things like that, creating this, these massive gaping holes in the safety net. And, it used to be that homelessness was more of isolated, it wasn't this sort of mass phenomenon involving families and children that it is today. Homelessness as we know it today is really a product of the neoliberal era, the last 40 or 50 years. And prior to that, there were skid rows, there were single room occupancies like flop houses. If you've ever seen the movie Big with Tom Hanks, the place that he stays in, where you could keep a roof over your head at least. It might have been shabby, it might have been really bad conditions, but you were indoors. You weren't on a park bench or something like that. That image of homelessness is really new, and it's due to structural changes in the economy and in government programs and things like that. This is neoliberalism, basically cutting down the concessions of the social democratic era. So yeah, it's not going away. In fact, currently, the housing market, they're saying, is, quote, cooling off. In fact, we're experiencing a sharp crash of the housing market, such as happened in 2022 when the pandemic started. So we'll see where this goes. It's almost already at the low that it was at then, and it's likely to continue. So maybe prices will come back into an affordable range. Part of what's driving that, though, is that mortgages are insanely expensive. So what does it mean for a mortgage to be expensive? Well, a mortgage is basically the loan that you take out to pay for the house over a period of 10, 20, 30 years, something like that. And how expensive that loan is means how much interest are they charging you. Well, with the Fed raising interest rates, it's more expensive to borrow money. That gets passed down to both to businesses and to consumers. Really, anybody trying to borrow money, it becomes more expensive. So you want the loan, well, you're going to pay more interest on that. So with housing right now, they're not building enough housing. So there's a shortage of new stock being built. The stuff that is existing is massively overpriced, although those prices are starting to drop now, but they'd have to drop a lot to even be remotely reasonable, especially considering a lot of this, the stock is crap. It's 30, 40 years old and not necessarily in the best of shape. And, they're getting 3 or 4 times, or the price is being set at 3 or 4 times what it should be. Also, a lot of areas now, there's just no jobs. So if you do want to move to somewhere where the housing is cheaper, hope you work online. Oh, and by the way, hope you don't like actually going anywhere in the real world, because the entire community, might be hollowed out. There might be nowhere to go, shopping or just recreating, doing different things around town. There might not be much of a town left. And then if you do need to work locally, look for a job locally, good luck. So, that's where you can find affordable housing. A lot of times is where there's really, the prices come down that much because it's totally undesirable to live in a particular area. One of the, quote, sacrifice zones of the U.S. So things are bad. And my point is, the issue of the housing crisis and the corresponding homelessness, because homelessness is caused by a lack of affordable housing, period. We need to decommodify housing entirely. It's a basic human need, and it shouldn't be treated in the way that it is, as a commodity. That's another thing driving the current crisis is large corporations and then even petty bourgeois are buying up housing for commercial purposes to rent it out to people. So it used to be you just buy the house when you were ready to do that. Now, you want to live in a house, you got to pay rent to a corporation. It's neo-feudalism. Either to a large corporation or to, some landlord that owns like 24 properties or something like that. And so that was something that was happening during the early days of the pandemic as well, was like a lot of people who had Airbnbs were losing them because they had just sort of taken out the mortgage on all these properties, and then nobody was getting Airbnbs and they had to sell them off. So whoever had enough money to scoop those things up at that time bought a bunch of housing for pennies on the dollar. And anyway, we're going back into a price crash again. And anyway, there needs to be, at a minimum, regulations that housing can't be treated this way. We need more public housing also to put downward price competition, basically improve the downward pressure on the prices through competition. But there's been a moratorium on construction of public housing in the U.S. for the last 2.5 decades. One thing I will credit the otherwise fairly useless AOC and the squad with is they were able to lift the moratorium. I don't know what's going on as far as the actual construction, but the way has been cleared at least for more construction of public housing. But that is literally just like a basic preliminary step. A lot more needs to be done with that. But anyway, the point is, you're a socialist. You're involved with the fighting movement of working people and poor people and the oppressed generally. Housing is a major issue. Democrats aren't talking about it. Republicans obviously aren't talking about it. Libertarians obviously aren't talking about it. None of the capitalist parties are talking about it. So this is something that needs attention, and it's something that I hope everybody can get brought up to speed on. It's one thing to learn about the history of socialist revolution and socialist construction in various countries that did have a proletarian revolution. That's good to know. We also need to be up to date with the struggles that are going on right in front of us. When people join an organization or party or union, what can you work on that is right here? These are some of the struggles that have been going on. I think there's great stuff in that syllabus. So, but yeah, the state of homelessness is shocking, a crime against humanity, all of these things and more. And I don't think it's going to get better anytime soon without a lot of struggle. Question about, are there more Hoja works coming up on the channel? Yes. So Enver Hoja, leader of Albania, Socialist Albania. Yeah, I actually like Hoja's works quite a bit. I mean, as far as just being a very sort of pure take on Marxism-Leninism, I generally like his writings. They are pretty long. So we have the recommended reading list for the American Party of Labor. That's a Hojaist party. I'm not a Hojaist, but I do like reading lists. And if you'd like to get, something of that perspective, it's a place you can start, and it's also a guide to some of Hoja's works. The problem is they're very long, like hundreds and hundreds of pages each. We'll be getting to them eventually. I'm trying to close out the basic ML study guide and then do some early Marx and Engels. And, this is alongside the current stuff, like the housing and homeless industrial complex syllabus. But I kind of want to do more of a chronological push. So we might not get back to the Hoja stuff for a while. In the meantime, I have a couple of Hoja things up. For example, I think a couple of them went on to that American Party of Labor reading list. But the rest of it in the playlist is just links to the computerized readings that you can find, for example, on like Finball's Marxist-Leninist Theory channel. A lot of those channels are now linked. Actually, if you go to the S4A YouTube channel, the channels tab, I linked to actually some other audiobook channels too. I think there's 18 channel links up there right now if you're looking for some other channels. Those are ones that I don't always have like a close personal relationship with all those channels. Some of them I do, but I think that they're at least doing reasonably good work. And the 6 channels that I just added recently are some small audiobook channels that if you're looking for something and it's not up at S4A, you might check over there also. And then also I put one from Rotfront, the independent communist labor federation and group out of Russia. So anyway, yeah, some interesting channels linked there now. But yeah, they do tend to take a long time. However long, I was telling the chat before, however long it takes, the actual duration of the video, like say you're listening to a 45-minute video at S4A, probably took me at least twice that long to actually record it, because, if I fumble, emphasis in a particular line, I like to retake, or if I run out of breath at a weird point in a sentence, I like to retake it. I like it to be sort of a clean reading and a good performance of the thing, so to speak, so that I'm not sort of stumbling through the whole thing. So yeah, it takes 2 to 3 times as long as the actual video just to record it. Sometimes it takes multiple sittings and all that. So yeah, doing a like 4-hour, 5-hour, Hoja reading, everything else kind of comes to a halt. It just takes up huge, huge, huge amounts of time. But anyway. And yes, there are Thomas Sankara books on the channel. There's a few readings now. I'll also be uploading 2 more in the coming week. Reading a biography, a comment says, about Heinrich Himmler. He came from a petty bourgeois / professional middle class background with connections to the monarchy of Bavaria. He was very well educated with entire reading book list. Not sure what that says. And his mentor was Gregor Strasser, and used pseudo-revolutionary rhetoric that very much mirrors the Patsok. Yeah, this is, fascism in a nutshell. Anchors in feudalism, pseudo-revolutionary, sort of radical rhetoric and aesthetics, counter-revolutionary, highly reactionary content. So yeah, petty bourgeoisie, check. Like we're going down the whole checklist. Absolutely. Let's see. The Communist Voice organization, which is run by former members of the Marxist-Leninist Party USA. Is that Hojaist? I know they use that sort of naming system a lot. Has some very good articles on the 7th Congress of the Comintern and how it justified a lot of bad things like Browderism. Can you link me that? I would be interested in reading that. I see the other link down there below. Can you link that one from the Communist Voice organization? Um, yeah. So one of the things about Browderism, the way that I'd like to approach Browderism, I think at least to start, is by reading more of William Z. Foster, who was sort of the loyal opposition to that, in meaning, uh, supportive opposition. So I mean, maybe there could have been more militant opposition of Browderism and the sort of revisionism there. But Foster wrote about the struggle against revisionism in CPUSA and in the labor movement and things like that. So I have some readings picked out, haven't gotten to them yet. Did I hear about the anti-lockdown protests in China? No, not specifically. I have heard that China is easing up their COVID policy, which I think is a giant mistake. Somebody pointed out it came on the heels of a meeting between Xi and Biden. Um, Read this in passing, so I haven't really heard or done a lot of extensive analysis. They're not going as hands off as the West, but they are easing restrictions, and already there's been a huge surge in cases. So I think that this is not good. Did I get a second booster shot? Yes. My last booster was months and months. Probably it was probably ineffective. Um, so yeah, we know that the coverage from the vaccines that we have and the booster shots tends to wane with time. There is some evidence which suggests that the Novavax vaccine, which is not fully approved yet, of course, and is a different kind of technology of most of them, may have sterilizing immunity, meaning like you really don't get infected at all. It gets into your body and your immune system just takes care of it. There is, at least their company has claimed it can cause sterilizing immunity in the sinuses and throat and like other, major respiratory points of entry. That would be hugely exciting. We're still, I think, waiting for some more substantiation of that claim. At least I'm waiting to see it. But yeah, so I mean, with the vaccines though, the coverage is temporary. It's still better than, um, well, let's put it this way. There are trade-offs between getting the quote natural immunity from an infection versus the vaccine. The quote natural immunity, if you actually catch COVID, is a bit more robust because you're getting exposed to the whole virus, not just the spike protein. The trade-off there is that while that is a bit more robust, now there's such immune escape with the current variants of the virus that it's still only good for a couple of months, and it comes at the cost of massive, massive inflammation and a possible breakthrough case. So it does, that was the thing before at least. I think in 2022, the vaccine is just in every single way better because much lower risk of it doing any actual inflammatory serious damage in your body. Um, Whereas the virus has like a pretty decent risk of that. 1 in 6 people, even fully vaccinated people, get long COVID if you catch even a milder or moderate case of COVID. So yes, I got the second booster because my last booster I had, a long time ago, and I would recommend everybody who's eligible get your second booster if that's something that you don't have a health condition precluding. But talk to your healthcare provider if you have one about that. So next comment: the Third Congress of the Comintern had a great little bit on organizing the unemployed under its single issue struggles and single issue demands. Okay, that's very good. So this is a piece linked Third Congress of the Communist International on tactics. This is from Theses, Resolutions, and Manifestos of the first four Congress. Oh, that should probably be plural. The first four Congresses of the Third International, translated by Alex Holt and Barbara Holland, 1980. So this is from 12 July 1921. It's kind of a longer piece, but maybe we'll do this in the next stream. So thank you for that link, Flashy. I had mashed potatoes, so good. Yeah, the wonderful thing about potatoes is they combine so well with so many other foods. Also, they are such a nice receptive canvas for all kinds of other herbs and spices. You can put, obviously, things like rosemary and garlic in them. You can, put black pepper. You can, those are some of the typical things you see. But you can go nuts with it. I mean, add some turmeric, ginger. You can get, definitely, potatoes are such a good canvas for other flavors. They're such a nice base for things. So yeah, I had mashed potatoes too. Okay, so thank you for that link on can Paxlovid treat long COVID. Let's check it out. This is from Time. Researchers are studying whether Paxlovid can treat long COVID. This is from July. So I may have seen something about this. I'll take a look at this. Maybe we'll cover this in the next stream. Thank you, Joseph. Hold on, I gotta clear my throat. All right, hopefully that's a little better. All right, so yeah, the anti-lockdown protests, somebody responds. I've seen videos here and there. The protests seem to be about working conditions as well, something to keep an eye on. Yeah, there have been clashes over conditions in some of the factories there. China's allowing capitalism. They rolled back some of the things, communes that were set up during Mao's era, what we could call the more, purely socialist construction era. They've been allowing tons of capitalism. And the conditions are not really good in the capitalist portions of what's going on in China. Whether you think it's part of a larger plan for socialism or not, objectively the conditions are not good. So yeah, I've seen a number of things about that, and I saw some short videos of street battles. I didn't have all the context on what was going on though. Multiple generations, including my own, have been raised in the U.S. with rampant homelessness totally normalized, a major factor in socializing people in the U.S. into sociopaths. Yeah, I mean, it's a very uncaring system, and people being told that it is normal in our society to just turn your nose up at people suffering needlessly. This is a society that needs to die, To have respect within this society, you have to respect this society. I don't respect this society, and so I don't get respect within this society. But that's the price of fighting for a new world to replace this one. We need to fight for socialism and to tear down capitalism and replace it with something that is actually human-centered, where it's not just the construction of a sociopathic, hateful, uncaring, genocidal, I mean, the list goes on and on. Not that kind of system. That's not the kind of world that most people want to live in. The thing about us, people who have, self-identified as socialist, Marxist, communist, etc., we have to take the lead on these things. This is part of, strengthening the Vanguard is that segment of the working class who are most class conscious, most studied in history, most studied in economics, and sort of also willing to take the lead on this stuff. So, this is part of the duty of the class conscious revolutionary proletariat is to lead. And ultimately, it takes the involvement of tens of millions of people from the masses of the working class. But, we don't see the kind of mass uprisings always happening. We live in a police state. The U.S. is incredibly violent and very lenient with the cops as far as what they allow in terms of just shooting people dead in the street. And, that kind of fear has permeated every level of society. Ultimately, chilling protest. We have a very poor culture of protest in the U.S., so it is incumbent on us to, stimulate the masses back towards action in their class interests. And ultimately, this system will be replaced when millions of people are willing to fight and honestly die to change it. You know, as long as people are not really willing to stand up and put a lot on the line as far as risk against the system is just going to keep plowing on as is. So there's still sort of a lot of growth that needs to happen in terms of people's willingness to put things on the line to change the system. And while we're waiting for that to happen, we need to, help build the consciousness and get organization ready for influx of people. But yeah, we're not there yet, and I think it's going to take a while. But so next comment: the lack of empathy towards unhoused people is truly abhorrent. Every time I see a homeless person, I always give them change. It might be a small gesture on my part, but it helps out. Plus, studies show that wealthy people are less empathetic than poor people, and a link to Scientific American. Yeah, I've read stuff about that too. It's part of how, the things that you have to do in this system to hoard all that wealth in the first place. I mean, you have to do a lot of kind of awful things and to be a conscious participant in an exploitative system. So yeah, some of us have even had chances to participate in that system and have turned them down because it's just not something that we want to do, whether or not we could personally gain from it. There are, other things that are more worthwhile to do with your life, such as fighting to tear that entire system down so that people can actually have a dignified life across the board without anyone being exploited. That's the system we're trying to create. And the people who buy into it, the existing system, they tell themselves all kinds of lies about, well, if I didn't do it, somebody else would do it. Yeah, you're right. I mean, there are always going to be antisocial personalities, and there's going to be people who would exploit. That's why the rest of us need to set up a system that protects most of the population against that kind of exploitation and that suppresses that activity whenever it arises. You can't just say, well, if you can't beat them, join them. No, you're doing a horrible thing by doing that, and it's just not really acceptable. Anyway, next comment: I appreciate the direction that you're taking and look forward to your analysis and attention on these topics, including the commitment to COVID. I had the thought that public health in a capitalist government is an oxymoron, since much of capitalism is about cutting people off from basic necessities in order to sell it back to them for profits. Homelessness is an excellent example of this. Yeah, public health in the U.S. is kind of a joke. I mean, again, back in the beginning of the New Deal social democratic era, the rise of public health as kind of a new phenomenon, it helped with the early vaccination campaigns and with, other basic education in very poor places. Some of it was just to teach people like new technology, refrigerators, how to just have, use various sanitation measures, things like that. But public health was never really well established in the U.S. and in the neoliberal era. Like everything else public, it's been undermined dramatically. Communist Voice Org has many articles you can find here on the 7th Congress. I read the first one so far, and it was very good. Let me take a look. So yeah, I'm not that familiar with them. Leninist United Front Tactics versus the 7th Congress of the Communist International. All right. There's about half a dozen articles there. I'll take a look. Thank you. Do I know when the Novavax booster will be available to the public? So far as I know, Novavax has been approved as the primary series. So if you haven't gotten vaccinated at all, you can get Novavax as your base 2-dose vaccine. Also, it's been approved as the first booster. So if you haven't gotten boosted at all yet, you just got the first 2 shots, or 1 shot if you had a 1 dose for your first thing, then you can get the Novavax as your first booster. It has not been approved yet as the second booster, at least as of a few weeks ago. I haven't checked on that more recently. So if somebody knows otherwise, please update me. But last I checked, as of a few weeks ago, was only approved as the first booster. Why? I don't know. I mean, I don't know as far as like a medical, scientific, evidence-based position. There's a lot of speculation that it's because of sweetheart deals that were made with Moderna and other companies making the mRNA vaccines, which are fine. I mean, I've had mRNA vaccines myself. It is what it is. But they, invested a lot of money in that, and there is speculation that they're sort of being given an artificial space to continue to try to recoup their money. And so the theory goes that the Novavax approval has been delayed, not for any good reason, but because of that. Next comment. Yeah, let's talk about potatoes. Potatoes are amazing. Apparently they aren't so healthy, but sweet potatoes are fine. Problem is, I don't think sweet potatoes are so great tasting. So potatoes, there are compounds called acrylamides. If you eat potatoes are fine for you generally. What you want to avoid is potatoes cooked at real high temperatures, such as frying. That's also like baking. If you're baking a potato at like 400, 450 degrees. There are compounds called acrylamides which form in potatoes at high temperatures. So potato chips, French fries, maybe baked potatoes. If you are boiling potatoes or steaming them, for example, to make mashed potatoes, that is better. Doesn't have the same acrylamide formation. Acrylamides are not good for you. And otherwise, I mean, potatoes have vitamin C. They are a complex carbohydrate, starch, in other words, which, there's nothing, there's a lot of, starch gets a lot of negative press, and potatoes are fine. I mean, they're not real sugary. That's something a lot of people need to avoid. I mean, don't overdo them, but I think that they're a fine base for things. I mean, whole grains and things like that also provide complex carbohydrates for energy. No, nothing against potatoes really. Although, again, you want to avoid the ones cooked at higher temperatures. And something you can do with sweet potatoes, I'm in the same boat with you. Sweet potatoes are different. They cook similarly, but they're a different plant. They're orange and they're sweet. So sweet potatoes are very good for you. They have a lot of vitamin A. That's what makes them orange, just like a carrot. And what you can do is kind of do a 50-50. If you're making mashed potatoes, do like, or you can do, even if you really don't like sweet potatoes that much, do like 2/3 potatoes and 1/3 sweet potatoes. And you can get some more of the sweet potatoes in, but it's not quite as like syrupy sweet as the sweet potatoes can sometimes be. So yeah, but the sweet potatoes don't have some of those same problems. But yeah, they have a different consistency, they have a different texture, they have a different taste. But yeah, no. You will never hear me espousing potato hate here at this channel. China is a one-party social democracy at this point. Yeah, I mean, I have. Where do we go? Some messages got. Oh, okay. Hey, we have a mod here today. Wonderful. I was like, wait a minute. I thought the mod disappeared, but the other mod is here. Oh, and Shakespeare is back. Okay. I don't know what happened there. Shakespeare disappeared for a while. But hey Sal, welcome. I didn't get a chance to see what those messages were by Stop Animal Murder and Torture. But we'll see. We'll see what they were going on about. Anyway, as far as China being a one-party social democracy at this point, sorry, I got off track there. I'm aware that that's a lot of people's position. I definitely understand why people say that. I've said in the past, I see cause for hope and I see cause for major concern with China. I think that what's going on with Russia sort of possibly running itself into the ground at this point with the invasion of Ukraine, What China does with that is probably going to be pretty telling. But yeah, I mean, they've opened the doors to capitalism in a way that, uh, let me put it this way: when I have said that I think that there is some cause for hope there, I think for me it was looking at some of the vestiges of socialism that are still around in China, and some of that basis, and I don't know. I definitely, there's also a point of view out there that they've gone so far down the capitalist road that it would basically take a second revolution for them to get back to where they were before. I think that, that may be right. And I don't know what else to say. We'll see where they go. Because the way that they are doing the capitalism that they're doing, it isn't the same style as the U.S. And the thing is, capitalism leads to predictable places, just understanding the laws of development, even if it gets rolled out in a slightly different way. Um, I don't know. I want to go into more depth on this at some point because I think it's when I on the cause for concern side, there definitely is a lot. And what can you say? The world communist movement fell into revisionism decades ago. Well, we were talking about neoliberalism earlier, and also in the one of the articles I was recording earlier today on homelessness. And this was a wave of reaction across the entire world. China started introducing massive amounts of capitalism, and I don't think the arguments for that are as compelling as some others do. Um, my cause for hope is, more or less, could forces within China turn that around? I think it would be difficult, though, and the more closely I look at it, yeah, we'll see. I still leave a question mark there just because life is full of surprises and you never know what's going to happen. But that wave of reaction that we know in the U.S. is neoliberalism going from social democracy back into basically just free market, privatize everything, libertarianism. China had steps backward, the USSR had steps backward, and it kind of all happened around the same time. So, wave of reaction around the world. How do we get out of this at this point? I think that's kind of the larger discussion that S4A is trying to contribute to, putting out the resources that we do. Because undoubtedly, we have to get out of this wave of reaction that we are currently in. I think whether you're a social democrat, a Marxist, an anarchist, whatever, you would agree we have to get out of the wave of reaction that we're currently in. That is the task of the broader left right now, as the left has had many defeats, in the last 40, 50 years. But anyway. Very inspiring to hear you talk like this in face of blowback. I love your booze because I've seen what you cheer. I never have cash on me anymore for when I see unhoused people. Um, Talking like this in the face of blowback. Do you mean on the potatoes or? No, I just don't know what you mean. What you're referring to. I'm always talking like this in the face of blowback. You're gonna have to be more specific. Anyway. Okay. Any kind of frying at high temperature in fat turns the potatoes carcinogenic technically. That would be the acrylamides I was talking about. Oils, butter, after cooking in water would be totally fine. Yeah, you can add oil to it after it's been cooked. Yeah. But the thing, so water, of course, boils at 212 degrees Fahrenheit or 100 Celsius. It just doesn't get any hotter than that. Steam gets hotter than that. But so, like, if you're boiling potatoes, that's as hot as they get. So you're keeping the temperature fairly low. Air, of course, gets hotter, and oil, of course, gets hotter than that. So if you're baking or frying, you can cook it at much higher temperatures. Um, but yeah, adding it after the fact is not going to add to the heat. But it's fattening, eating carbs and fats, especially together. It makes them more palatable, which makes it overeat. Well, yeah, you have to use some sense there. But there's nothing wrong with them in and of themselves. So you're saying eating plain potatoes is satiating. Yeah, I mean, I would put like oats in that category too, of just like very satisfying things that sort of sustain you for a while. Just don't add fat to the potato. Well, I'm trying to think through my own experience on that, and I don't know. I don't know. I mean, if you use sort of the right condiment, there's not necessarily a need to add fat to it, but it depends. I mean, unless you're using something like turmeric, where the active compounds in turmeric are fat soluble, and you might want something for that reason. But anyway, okay. So there's a satiety index chart for different foods of like how satisfying they are. This would be interesting. It looks like it's in German. I'll take a look at that for later. I did not know such a thing existed, but that's interesting, that they've measured how satisfying different foods are. More than steak, they say, the um, simple plain potato. Gotta get that link. All right. So there's a comment about China. I really don't understand this framework of one party versus multi or two party systems. Every government, bourgeois or proletariat, is rooted in a composition of social organizations that form a cohesive whole, or what could be called one party. Just because the name party is used for both, say, the CPC or CPSU and the Democrats and Republicans doesn't even make them similar organizations. Um, so anyway, sorry, I'm still looking at the potato thing. So China is not it's not actually a one party. They do allow other parties, although at the national level it really is just the Communist Party. But there are other parties in China. So that first of all, um, there are probably more specific readings on this topic. But let me continue the comment for a minute. The closer I look at China, I also see less and less hope for a, quote, real communist takeover, more or less. People who assert it's happening right now and is personified in Xi are just kind of blind. Yeah, I don't think it's happening in Xi myself either. Um, Xi's father was also in Deng Xiaoping's circle, and so that family has been pretty close with all of the capitalist era stuff going on in China. Um, yeah, I don't think it's happening right now, but you have a country with a communist history and at least nominal understanding of Marxism going on in a lot of places. You know, I don't know. I try to look at the bright side, but yeah, I mean they're allowing tons of capitalism right now, more and more. I mean, if you look at any sort of in the cause for concern category, which is probably the bigger category overall, you look at charts of where things were in, say, 1990 and where they are today, such as urban employment, um, used to be much more public sector. Now it is much more private sector. And pretty much, most of those indicators have shifted way, way, way over. Like the majority, I believe, of the economy now is private, like 55%. And so for the people who say that yes, but it's being directed by communists, and I've found this compelling at times in the past. How long do you think it is actually going to be controlled by communists, though? Assuming that the people calling themselves communists today are even would even still really qualify as communists. Like, let's just take that at face value for a moment. Let's assume that they're great communists and they're just trying this sort of wacky strategy to not lose it all and whatever else. Well, if capitalism just keeps growing and growing, for how long? Because you compare what's going on in China now, for example, to the NEP in the USSR. That was rolled out for a limited time, very specifically to have class struggle take place. Like there was already capitalism in to, you know, Russia, etc. At that point. It was implemented to have a controlled class struggle with the goal of having socialism win out, not just to build up, the productive forces, which is the slogan we constantly hear to justify everything out of China. It was for a limited amount of time with the specific goal of switching over to socialist construction on a very short-term goal basis. That's not really what I see going on in China. So, and again, we have limited information on what is going on in China, because a lot of it is not produced in English, and so unless you're fluent in the relevant languages, then you're not really going to get it firsthand. It's just hard to get information out of China. So to a certain extent, the analysis is difficult just due to lack of information. But then beyond that, what we do see, for example, like Western capital firms that have invested in China, they do publish things in English because they want to keep track of their investments and so on. And it's not real encouraging, and it doesn't seem to be done with an eye towards socialism winning out in the class struggle. I know that that's what's stated, but to me, I don't see it. That's how it's looking. Again, I try to hold out some hope that there's something I'm missing, but I don't know. And it's an open discussion as far as I'm concerned, but I have, since launching this channel, had a lot more conversations with people, sort of pro-China, anti-China, as far as pro-China being, yes, China's in communist hands, yes, they're definitely headed towards socialism. And a lot of, anti-China in the sense of, no, China is not actually in the hands of communists, it's in the hands of revisionists, and they're just building capitalism, not socialism. They say that to buy themselves time, but that's not where they're going at all. I've had a lot more conversations and looked at a lot more data since beginning this channel almost 3 years ago. I have to say I've gravitated more to the much more skeptical side. So yeah. Yeah, so another comment. I'm 50-50 on China. I'm pretty critical of their current trajectory, but I've hoped they might pull through. And that's the thing. I think I was starting in a similar position, but I think the more justifications that I've heard for it over time, most of them have not been very compelling, honestly. So that's kind of walked me back over to the skeptical side. Oh yeah, Sal, please take. Actually, you know what? I'll take care of this. Talking about COVID being a fraud. Shut the fuck up. Just honestly, go find some libertarian stream. Spread your bullshit over there, please. All right. Another comment. I have faith in the people of China. From what I can see of the protests, it is not neoliberal in nature. There is certainly none of the nonsense I saw in the Freedom Convoy. Yeah, I don't know. Like I said, it's kind of hard to come by actual information coming out of China, so I don't really know what is going on there as far as the COVID protests. I mean, and trying to get news through the U.S. press, I mean, I do not trust that that is going to give an accurate picture of what's happening. China requires a revolution. The most revolutionary sections in China are from marginalized peoples of China and the exploited workers. I mean, I'll say this, hands down, whatever is going on in China today as far as the restoration of capitalism or just merely the allowing of controlled amounts of capitalism, I mean, is anyone familiar with a sort of side-by-side analysis of the NEP versus Deng's market reforms period and the extent of capitalism that was allowed under each? Because I think that what's going on today dwarfs the NEP manyfold. So, yeah, just the people are trying to make it out to be like similar to that. I don't actually think that that's a great comparison. But anyway, wherever they're headed currently, China has much more experience with socialism firsthand than most countries. So hopefully there is enough of vestiges of that socialist history and experience and knowledge for them to pull off what they need to do. I hope so. So. Oh God, that person I banned is now messaging me. Shut the fuck up. There we go. And just seriously, it's just amazing. No, I don't want to hear your COVID denial nonsense. I really don't. Sorry, it's all potato comments from me today, I fear. That's fine. Keeping some potato threads going, it's important. In Lenin's work, Left-Wing Childishness, he goes into the rationale behind the NEP and how it was meant to have state capitalism stamp out the existence of the petty bourgeoisie and small-scale commodity production in general. China building a middle class is doing the opposite of what the NEP meant to do. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. No, that's fine, Sal. Uh, we've only had one troll so far, so that's really good, actually. Yeah, and which classes of people in China are protesting? I wonder. Maybe that middle class that never should have been there in the first place. Yeah, and again, I don't know. Like I said, it's very hard to get accurate information out of China. So a lot of this is based in generalities, and the few limited stats that we get from various, economic indices coming out of China, various economic reports. But so I'm trying to couch this, as the informed guess that it is. But yeah. Also, one of the major features of NEP and socialism, for that matter, is and was the monopoly on foreign trade, which is stressed by Lenin, Stalin, Mao, and Hoxha. Absolutely. I want to point out also that the dung market reforms were an inspiration for the USSR's, which helped break the country. So, China managed to here. Let's launch a new theory right now, and of course this is tongue in cheek, but let's launch a new theory right now. Deng's market reforms were in fact part of the Sino-Soviet split and rivalry, intended to get the USSR to follow them, so that the USSR could be destroyed and China would come out on top. And it worked. But then China forgot to go back again to socialism. Now, though, anyway, we'll leave that one there for now. NEP took place in Russia when it was a semi-feudal capitalist imperialist nation that saw a massive decline in living due to World War I and Civil War. It was only supposed to last until 1925, lasted until 1928 instead. Yeah. I think when one fully understands the theory of socialism as a transitional state, one can see clearly that China is developing away from communism, not toward it. The question is how this development could and will be reversed. I consider Dungists to be people who reject the premise that a reverse in this development is necessary, that China is already developing towards communism. Honestly, the more I listen to modern, theorists on this issue, it really sounds just more like the LaRouche people of just like, building communism is building socialism, actually. Or did I say that wrong? Building capitalism is building socialism, actually. That's what I meant to say. Yeah. China from 1978 onwards is nowhere near the conditions of NEP Russia. It isn't even the same conditions as the new democracy era China of the 1950s. Yeah. The task is to abolish class society, not create new classes. Why would they want to destroy the USSR, though? They had that rivalry. I'm joking, obviously, but yeah, I forget the source on that, but I was just reading about how, China's market reforms was an inspiration for what happened in the 80s with the USSR, which of course we know did not have a great outcome. But just saying. It still seems like China is developing in a more socially responsible way than their ideological opposites. Yeah, so that's what I was saying before. They're sort of rolling out the capitalism with a different style. In other words, when we saw social democracy in the United States, it was social democracy coming out of what? The robber baron period, the Gilded Age, the early struggles of, for reform in the early 20th century, World War I, things like that. And we got social democracy out of militant labor and radical struggles that fell short of a revolution, but were able to achieve significant reform, and that happened, of course, across similar imperialist countries, Canada, Western Europe, etc., around the same time. China, doing social democracy now, is not coming from robber baron Gilded Age capitalism. They're coming out of socialism. So it's, as far as doing it in a different style, and they're doing it in a more, quote, socially responsible way, they're starting from a different place. So when I say that there are vestiges of socialism, of like their earlier socialist history still around, I think a lot of them have been uprooted, like many of them have been uprooted, but they are coming from a different place. So, I mean, is there cause for hope there? I really don't know. But, and as far as, socially responsible unfurling of capitalism, capitalism is capitalism. So at a certain point, it's just going to be what it is. And, they maybe haven't reached the point yet where it is showing all of its true colors. There are still the sort of anchors and more social things. But I'd say that just it's a matter of time as they allow capital, like I said before, you can argue that communists are in charge of it currently, but as capital grows, its power grows. For how long? For how long? Now, there was a conversation I had recently with somebody who I think made the best arguments that I had ever heard for there being some kind of plan for socialism down the line. And specifically it revolved around things like computers. So they were saying that before they opened up to the West, and a lot of the Chinese agreements is that China gets basically rights to the intellectual property. Before they did that, they were way behind on computers, which, as we know, are kind of ruling the 21st century. And this is a thing. There's a video I was watching on YouTube a few months ago about the history of Soviet computing and things like that. And it may have been a factor in, it was not as advanced as some of the things that were going on in the West towards the end. And, this was one of the things that China, this person was arguing, saw that they had to get their hands on more of Western computing technology. Now, I guess my question around that comes back to so you can't build fast processors on your own, but you can somehow constrain capital on your own. I mean, or at all. And that's sort of the thing to me is whatever thought you start out with in this process, and maybe pure as the driven snow, can you control capital in the ways that they're claiming to be able to control capital? And I think there's a lot of doubt for very good reasons about that. Yeah, exactly. Socialist construction is reduced to improving and expanding the means of production. Yeah, and that really isn't. Stalin actually wrote about this in the early 50s. I want to say it's in Economic Problems of the USSR. He wrote about or criticized people within the USSR who were trying to do exactly that, overemphasizing developing the means of production. And so this is, not a line that Stalin agreed with, and so on. So, I mean, there's a long-standing basis of criticism there. All the gray zone people and around their circle are Dungists. Danny Haifang seems like Deng's #1 fan. Yeah, I've seen Danny Haifang. I mean, he was the one that was, he doesn't have, the worst opinions on the internet. Obviously, the Patsoks and the LaRouches are several orders of magnitude worse, but I wouldn't call a lot of it good. Referring to Vladimir Putin as a progressive force, not so much, really. Progressive force in possibly driving Russia into the ground. So, yeah. I don't know. The funny thing about the New Democracy is that even in 1953, Mao had already attacked the right deviationists for opportunist phrases like firmly establish the new democratic social order, and wanted to instead push for socialist transformation. Link there to a piece, thank you Flashy. Refute right deviationist views that depart from the general line. I'll probably put this up on the channel, it's pretty short. June 15, 1953. So let's read from this a little bit, actually. The general line or general task of the party for the transition period, and here the transition period refers to the period from the founding of the People's Republic in China, 1949, to the basic completion of socialist transformation. The general line or general task of the party for this transition period was basically to accomplish the industrialization of China and the socialist transformation of agriculture, handicrafts, and capitalist industry and commerce over a fairly long period of time. This transition period is different in meaning from the transition period Comrade Mao Zedong spoke of at the 10th plenary session of the party's 8th Central Committee in September 1962 and thereafter, which denotes the entire historical period of transition from capitalism to communism. Okay, so specifically he's talking about the transition period from the founding of the PRC to the basic completion of socialist transformation, not to the complete transition from capitalism to communism, just to make that clear. So the general line or general task of the party for the transition period is basically to accomplish the industrialization of the country and the socialist transformation of agriculture, handicrafts, and capitalist industry and commerce in 10 to 15 years or a little longer. This general line is a beacon illuminating our work in all fields. Do not depart from this general line, otherwise left or right mistakes will occur. Left being in quotes because left deviations are not truly left. Some people think that the period of transition is too long and give way to impatience. This will lead to left deviationist mistakes. Others have remained where they were after the victory of the Democratic Revolution. They fail to realize that there's a change in the character of the revolution, and they go on pushing their new democracy instead of socialist transformation. So yeah, this is 1953 he's writing. This will lead to right deviationist mistakes. Pushing for new democracy, now considered a right deviationist mistake. Take our agriculture, for instance. The socialist road is the only road for it. The party's central task in the rural areas is to develop the mutual aid and cooperative movement and constantly raise productivity in agriculture. The right deviation manifests itself in 3 remarks. Quote, firmly establish the new democratic social order. That's a harmful formulation. In the transition period, changes are taking place all the time, and socialist factors are emerging every day. How can this new democratic order be firmly established? It would be very difficult indeed to establish it firmly. For instance, private industry and commerce are being transformed, and if an order is established in the second half of the year, it will no longer hold firm next year. And changes are taking place in mutual aid and cooperation in agriculture from year to year too. The period of transition is full of contradictions and struggles. Our present revolutionary struggle is even more profound than the revolutionary armed struggle of the past. It is a revolution that will bury the capitalist system and all other systems of exploitation once and for all. The idea, firmly establish the new democratic social order, goes against the realities of our struggle and hinders the progress of the socialist cause. And then the second remark, move from new democracy towards socialism. That's a vague formulation. Moving towards the goal and nothing more, moving towards it year in, year out, still moving towards it after a lapse of 15 years. Merely moving towards it means that the goal hasn't been reached. The formulation sounds plausible but does not bear scrutiny. So in other words, Mao wanted a sharper timeline of we're not just moving forward, we are 20%, we are 40%, we're 60%, we're 80% of the way, etc. We're actually completing it. Third, sustain private property. Since the middle peasants are afraid of becoming too conspicuous and having their property communized, some people have raised this slogan, sustain private property, to put them at ease, but that is not right. We have proposed a step-by-step transition to socialism. That's a better formulation. When we say step-by-step, we mean that the steps are to be spread out over 15 years and over the 12 months in each year. Going too fast means erring to the, quote, left. Standing still means erring too much to the right. We must oppose left and right deviations and make a step-by-step transition until the whole process is completed. That's the whole piece. So, Yeah, I mean, good point. So Mao was basically saying that, like, by 1968, the idea was to complete the basic foundations of socialism. And granted, not everything came out ideally, to say the least, during some of that time period. But to then in 1978 go completely against most of this. Now, again, the most compelling, sort of on the devil's advocate side, the most compelling thing I heard was that if China was to keep its head above water at all in the 21st century, they needed better computing power than they were able to achieve on their own, hence letting in the industry and doing things like that. It's, part of the scrappy strategy for hanging in there and then giving themselves a basis for pushing off. However, why capitalism as a basis, why capitalism as the basis for all of this, and didn't really get an answer to that. I also still think cooperation with China is better than antagonizing them. Well, yeah, I mean, you and I are not in the U.S. imperialist government, so I mean, we are not going to be antagonizing China, you and I. So, but I mean, is what the U.S. doing cooperation with China entirely? You know that the imperialist world, which may or may not now include China, but this sort of established imperialist world of like the U.S., Western Europe, etc., deeply suspicious of everything that they can't militarily flatten and or buy, and yeah, so I mean, you see that hostility is still there. So this has been another one of the strategies that's been proposed as like a theory of what is going on with China, as far as if they hook the U.S. and other established capitalist countries in China in a way that their economy then comes to depend on China, then China has them in a vulnerable position, and it gives them leverage over them to not invade and things like that. Okay, nobody wants China to be invaded by the U.S. or anything like that. We've done videos in the past about how that would be probably a pretty tough war for the U.S. to fight with China. But that aside for the moment, yeah, I mean, nobody wants to see the U.S. flatten another country, especially one that has at least aspects of it that are still rooted in some kind of socialism. So, on the devil's advocate side, it's a halfway plausible thing. However, what is unmistakable is that these are massive departures from anything that has been previously recognized as at all Marxist. And if this is some continuation of Marxist struggles, the case has not entirely, I think, been made for that, and to say the least. So, anyway. So a comment there. This is very true. It is third world ascendant capitalism, not collapsing imperialism. Yeah. So I mean, yeah, the revisionist communist parties of the West that have like a friendly relationship or China solidarity committees, things like that. Yeah, I mean, war is not in the interest of any working people at all. I mean, neither is allowing capitalism to spread. Now, so in either case, what's happening currently, assuming the worst, that capitalism is just taking root in China and it's just a matter of time before all of their vestiges of socialism get stripped away, well, then capitalism gets restored. And let's assume for a minute that the U.S. gets a leg up on China and capitalism gets restored, because that's what the U.S. is going to do. The U.S. is going to suddenly start building socialism over there. So either way, those are both pathways to capitalism being reintroduced. If that's the way that it's going in either of those scenarios, yeah, I mean, that's not good. We don't want capitalism restored. Restoring it without war would be better than with war, probably. I mean, war is not generally good for working people, and there is the line of argument of like it's where empire is weakest that it gets defeated. But this is also, for example, the end of World War I and the Russian Revolution. or the end of World War II and the number of revolutions that happened then. The thing is that you need massive socialist organizing in place for that to actually be successful, and not just a bloodbath for working people that still ends up with capitalists in charge. So that's a key factor there. Anyway, I heard from one of the multipolar people saying that China would want to wage world war to defeat Western capital in order to usher in world socialism on the global stage, in part using the Belt and Road Initiative. Unless the West is defeated, they claim there can be no revolution, since global northern countries can't do revolution because of an accelerated police state. I think that global north countries can't do revolution because we're not organized for it, we're not talking about it, and we're not remotely close to having the kinds of social attitudes. Like I said earlier in this stream, what actually makes revolution possible is millions and millions of people being willing to die to change the social order. Okay, do we have that in the global north? I don't think so. So that's sort of the bottom line. Now, what are the causes of people having the attitudes that they have? That's another question, and that's multi-factor there. But yeah, as far as this thing about China is trying to defeat Western capital in order to usher in world socialism using the Belt and Road. Belt and Road was also, for me, something that I considered, kind of a saving grace. And I don't think that it's... A lot of people will criticize China for, they've taken over a few ports when countries weren't able to meet their loan terms. They've also forgiven a lot of those loans, too. So you have, for example, the history of the IMF, Western capital-linked IMF, and there are many decades of doing debt traps where they get a developing country on the hook for a lot of money that it can't pay back, and then they use that as leverage to implement governments in those countries that do austerity and set up those, quote, free trade zones where there's basically no laws, and they're able to set up sweatshops with no worker protections whatsoever. And yeah, so I mean, there's a long-standing history of IMF debt traps being tied to the West and doing all of the things that they're accusing China of maybe possibly doing at some point in the future. So it's, like the U.S. setting up hundreds of military bases in all these countries. It rings somewhat hollow when they're like, oh, well, China took over a port, and now theoretically at some point in the future, China could set up a military base on that property. Yeah. Also, though, I mean, the established Western capitalists have been doing that in dozens of countries and flat out invading them. To date, China has not really been doing anything remotely close to that. Are they friendly to revolutionary movements? I mean, increasingly no. But you can say they're at least not on the level of an IMF or something like that. So yeah, their behavior, it's been around the Belt and Road Initiative and things like that. It hasn't had all of those kinds of hallmarks. It hasn't been as hostile and exploitative as that. That said, I mean, is it what we would recognize as socialism? And not really. No, I mean, just we'll downgrade the not really to a no, really. So I don't necessarily see things there. So the Belt and Road, it's supposed to connect basically the Pacific to the Atlantic from China to Europe, and then go to many stops in between, and that's great as far as having that infrastructure. But is it really to do socialism, or is it to facilitate flow of capital back and forth from China and to Europe and back and all the points in between? I think that when you really break it down, again, is it socialism? Make the case. And when I hear people make the case, it just doesn't really add up. It again falls back into that category of building capitalism is building socialism, actually. Well, no, it isn't. I think it's more likely, if they have any socialist grand designs at all, that they intend to gather the global South to their favor by helping them develop in a more equitable way than what the West has done for decades. Yeah, this is what I've kind of been saying, and this is, I think, kind of the devil's advocate position. This will give the exploited countries more power and enable them to get out of really bad arrangements, which will weaken the benefits that those living in the imperial core receive from cheap commodities. So there's a recent example, El Salvador. And El Salvador's economy has been terrible. It's in Central America, just south of Mexico. And, I mean, not just south, but like in that region. And they've been building up a trade deficit year after year for decades. And things were getting so bad that they recently adopted Bitcoin as kind of like a last ditch effort to get some money. So Bitcoin is legal tender. And then Bitcoin tanked from the point where they bought into Bitcoin last year. Bitcoin has lost 2/3 of its value. So they sank over $100 million into that, lost most of it. And the IMF, they won't even give them a bailout deal at this point, even with all the strings attached that come with an IMF bailout deal. So China has stepped in with a bailout offer, an alternative bailout offer to El Salvador. And yeah, it favors free trade with China. This is capitalist, basically. At least my understanding of it. I mean, I may have not gotten all the details of it, so, you know, take that for what it's worth. But they have offered this deal to El Salvador. And this is some of, you know, the Western hypocrisy of like, oh God, China's taking advantage of this poor country that's in a desperate economic state. It's like, are you aware of what the IMF is all about? Yeah, so there's an example, but what are they really going to do? Is it going to help build socialism in El Salvador, or is it going to build them up to a level where they're able to just you know, produce for China basically? And maybe there will be some more dignity in that than there would be under IMF terms. But is it basically the same type of arrangement just with better terms? Yeah, I mean, you know, or in other words, getting a better deal than the IMF was going to give you as far as a bailout deal does not make it socialism. And we need to remember that. So, yeah. Somebody else in the mood for a baked potato right now. Wonderful. No, don't bake it. Steam that potato. Steam the potato. It's just as good. The real problem is all the great ideological leaders died too soon. If we just get those people back, that'd be great. I don't think that's really the whole problem at all. I do think Lenin died way too young. Way too young. Died in his early 50s. That's terrible. Really would have loved to have seen at least another decade of Lenin writing. I mean, how many great texts did Lenin write? Many. How many more would he have written had he stuck around? Who knows? I mean, an elderly Lenin overseeing the period before World War II, Lenin versus Hitler, what would have happened? I mean, you know, it could have been profoundly incredible. So we'll never know. And yeah. All of this with China is kind of premised on a secret conspiracy to enact socialism when the time is right. A ridiculous and anti-socialist proposition. Yep, I would agree with that. China will return to the socialist road when the proletariat decides to do so, basically. Whether this looks like a normal political transition, full-on revolution, or something in between remains to be seen. And I hold out hope that that can happen, and that the Chinese people do that. I hope that they are getting out, if there is some technological reason to be doing what they're doing right now, I hope they get it and are able to kick out the capitalist roaders and you know, reinstate class struggle, reinstate socialism. I mean, they've moved so far away from it at this point. As devil's advocate, China supposedly wants not just capital to develop Chinese infrastructure, but enough to make trains and roads for all the developing countries too, which is why they need to keep on this seemingly imperialist road. Yeah. So that is the case. Although, like I said, is it merely, though, a competing capitalist vision? Because just having being a better competitor to the IMF in terms of offering people fairer, slightly less exploitative deals, does not socialism make. China imperial. Hey, Shakespeare's back. Where'd you go? You disappeared. China imperializing the world will not bring socialism. I don't understand why people act like it's a good thing. China imperialism good is just siding with a different imperialist bloc. You know, in fairness, I think it's confusing because usually when countries have, counter-revolution, it's no longer headed by a communist party. You know, this is what we saw with the USSR and Eastern Europe, etc. So, to be fair, I think it's confusing to people. You want to have faith in the party. You want to sort of take them at their word that they're still doing the thing. That said, though, as Marxists, we need to do actual analysis. But even the analysis is somewhat difficult because getting accurate information in, say, the US about China is not the easiest thing to come by. So I'm just saying, for people who have gone down this road, I think it's understandable to an extent. But and I can even see people who are not socialist, and I think that is like maybe even the majority of quote anti-imperialists today. People who are not socialists don't really believe that socialism is possible. To them, getting capitalism under better terms, they're sockdams. So that's why they wind up siding with them. It's like, oh, well, they're going to fight the IMF, and the IMF is, pure evil, and the World Bank, and etc. Well, I mean, they're not wrong about that part. It is pure evil, but capitalism is capitalism, and China will end up there eventually because those are just the demands of capital. So yeah. So it's, in other words, I understand the confusion. I also, I've been having this conversation in various forums, and it's something I have largely shied away from because it's so contentious, so hostile. Now that I think the PATSOCs have been taken down a few notches, it may be time to revisit this topic a bit more. But that was like trying to build up S4A. Talking about trying to build socialism and waging struggle while making compromises. It's like trying to build up this channel and have a discussion on China. Especially in the fledgling days of this channel. And I see this channel as contributing resources and facilitating conversations. The conversation on China has not been an easy one to have, especially when you had, Caleb Muppet at the sort of top of his game and other similar voices out there. I think that we all have done a lot of work over the last few years in this sort of social media space to clear out room for some more honest analysis and discussion of these situations. And may we just continue to do that. Again, I hope by the end of the decade, we actually have a really strong movement going that is capable of, not just taking down an infracell or, jack off Hinkle or whatever, but some people with actual power, not just their lackeys, not just these media figures that they put out on behalf of LaRouche and Dugan and people like that. But, anyway, so I think that we're at the point now where there's more room for this kind of conversation, and I'm happy to have it. But I'll tell you, it was very, very difficult to even attempt to have a calm back and forth about this, not that far back in the past. Yeah, China does have active neoliberal parties that run in elections. Not so much at the national level, it's more like regional and local, but yeah. Mao himself says, "We do not want war, we love peace, but we will fight war to have peace." We just have social democratic parties masquerading as communists and revisionists in the global north. As long as things keep improving in China, I don't see the workers rising up. So, need to stop you at the word improving. What is improving? Because I don't know that people's... there's certain things that are arguably improving, and there are certain things that are just, like lifespan, life expectancy. Okay, that's continuing to go up. So that's good. It was doing that prior to 1978 as well. But yeah, it's continuing to do that. Other things, though, are not. Like working conditions are not necessarily great. You're getting a lot of the problems that capitalism introduces in any society where it gets introduced. So, people having long hours for little pay and, little control over conditions and things like that. I mean, that said, China probably in many ways has more control over a lot of things. Like as far as electing managers for different things, that's still a thing in China. Whereas it's really not in the U.S. Find me anywhere in the U.S. outside of like a worker cooperative where you get to elect the manager of a workplace. So I mean, there are still things in place in China that, compared to the U.S., make China look leaps and bounds ahead, even for all the capitalism that they've introduced. So I mean, you want to have a nod to that, but you also have to understand that if they continue on this road, that stuff may all get wiped away, and it might wind up becoming indistinguishable from the U.S. And that's something people also should understand. I'm going to take a quick break. This is actually there's more comments and I want to get to them. I need a quick break, so if you need a minute to get a drink or whatever, we'll be right back. All right, short break is over. There we go. Okay, so I guess we're in the middle of the comment about things improving. In this sense, revisionist communist parties and SOCDEM parties are perhaps more dangerous than neoliberals. Change won't happen until wages start decreasing and living standards drop. So, kind of a follow-up comment. A growing labor aristocracy, without a doubt, exists in China, forming the mass base for bourgeois counter-revolution, the expansion of imperialism, and ultimately fascism. So yeah, we're not yet seeing the full signs of this, but understanding, laws of development, we understand that it is kind of a matter of time if you allow capitalism to keep developing before these things take shape and then start acting in their class interests. So yeah, absolutely. This is something, again, a lot of the non-socialist, quote, anti-imperialists, they don't get because they're not Marxists and they really don't understand this. They know a handful of slogans like develop the forces of production or something, and they don't really understand or even want to understand the rest of it. So they're jumping on this kind of SOCDEM bandwagon, and I mean, it's like you take Infraself, for example. We did a video that, if you just search on America in the title of the video, it was the whole thing about how, quote, we are already living in socialism in the United States. I mean, these are the kind of people who are like some of the staunchest supporters. It's people who don't understand Marxism 101. So for those of us who do and can see past the present moment a little bit to, well, what happens if capitalism continues to expand? It's going to create these new classes, and then how do those classes generally act regardless of what country they're in? regardless of cultural forces. It's of the specific language or like food or style of dress that's used in a country. These things are economic universals, basically. So yeah, the mass base for bourgeois counter-revolution, the expansion of imperialism, and ultimately fascism, even if it looks like and was getting a different rollout in China than and is starting from a different point than it started from in the U.S. or in Western Europe, the end point is going to be the same. It might still be some time before they get there entirely, for it to be fully developed. But we would really like to not see it emerge at all. Then again, I'm not in China, and that's not something I directly influence. So, but we're trying to understand things that are happening in the world. So it's entirely fair to have these discussions. A lot of people are just like, well, "You're in the West. What do you know?" Well, Marxism is Marxism, and it holds true for the entire world, regardless of what country it is. It's laws of development and historical materialism. So it's not like certain countries are just exempt to what Marx pointed out at all. Second of all, if you think that we're not understanding key points of key data points, key pieces of information, please help make them more accessible. Because I swear to God, every time I try to, or I'm not even really trying to have this conversation anymore, but every time that I have tried to have this conversation in the past, I get hit with a bunch of slogans and no information, and that's basically it. And I've walked away from each one of those less convinced than ever that most of the people defending the current course in China really have any grasp on what they're doing. So comment, I'm not pro-shock therapy, but do you expect an uprising in a country where wages have quadrupled in 20 years? So that's a good question. And somebody asked, what do you mean by shock therapy? Shock therapy meaning like what the USSR went through. Rapid plunge into privatized everything. Rapid plunge into, libertarianism, basically. Libertarianism in the neoliberal, rapid plunge into neoliberalism. So you make a good point here. So here on the stream, we're a collection of Marxists looking at and discussing this subject. The average person is not. And for us, we can see, where the reintroduction of capitalism probably is going to take you. We understand that. The average person doesn't. And so they just look at, well, my wages went up and this and that. And they might be willing to put up with certain hardships because, the money situation is better. For those of us who look down the line at historical development, we might be able to see that these people are screwed further down the line because that improvement is not going to last forever. It's tied to certain conditions that aren't going to last forever. So this is where it takes skillful propaganda by Marxists to actually communicate to people that you don't understand, the current situation, it's not going to last forever. And can you convince people of that? Or will they keep supporting it? Yeah, and I think that's a reasonable question. Belt and Road would only cause another war between imperialists. Yeah. Stalin had pointed out that the contradiction between competing imperialisms proved in practice to be stronger than the contradiction between capitalism and socialism on a world scale, which also proves that war will never end without a world abolition of capitalism. So good comment, and yeah, let's break this down. So the U.S. and its close allies have already proposed under Biden the Build Back Better World project. This was intended, it was announced, I think, last year. I don't think they've really done anything with it yet. But it was announced basically as direct competition to the Belt and Road project. So I think that one of two things would happen with the Belt and Road is that either the U.S. will try to outcompete it, Well, actually, maybe not one of two things. So they'll either try to outcompete it with similar projects, and they're probably not going to do that because let's face it, they've had a very, very long time to build infrastructure, and they just really don't want to do anything like that. So that's unlikely. But now that China's doing it, they're like, oh, no, 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 we're going to do it. We're going to do it. Okay, well, I guess I'll believe it when I see it. And clearly, I think that announcement was just made to sort of try to intimidate China and its partners in that. So, option one is they just outcompete it with their own infrastructure project, not really something that the US is famous for at this point in history. Number two, they go after it militarily. I mean, that's entirely possible. There's US bases all throughout Central Asia and Europe and places where the Belt and Road would be going. And the US has all kinds of, has its fingers in those pies in many different ways. And the third option, I think probably the most likely, is that they just wind up buying part of it, and then it's not really Chinese anymore. Now, you could say that, well, again, China's run by communists, and they're going to keep tight controls over the terms and conditions of this infrastructure, and the US will be kept out. Well, we'll see about that, but I kind of doubt it. Already, what was the website I was looking at? OBOR, One Belt, One Road, OBOR Europe. OBOREurope.com. You can hear on this website all about the different countries that have a stake in the Belt and Road, specifically in Europe. So there's one with Ukraine, for example, and how the European countries are investing in the Belt and Road project. And you can say, well, it's going to remain under Chinese control or whatever. Yeah, I mean, for now, if the Western imperialists say, well, we'll let China build the thing and then we'll take it over, I mean, what would really stop them? But yeah, I think in the meantime, they're going to wind up buying into it. And for a while, there will be peaceful coexistence between these various large capitalist powers, including China, as it becomes more and more capitalist. And then what? Then eventually they're going to have a conflict that can't be settled by means of business. And then it will be settled by means of war. So, I mean, capitalism, some of the technology has changed, and the amount of capital consolidation has changed. But the basic dynamics they don't really change over time, and it's fairly predictable in these ways. It's what we learned from Marxism. It's always mind-blowing how young some revolutionaries died. Lenin, of course, in his early 50s. Hampton was only like 21. Sankara, 37. I keep on hearing people try and justify Chinese imperialism with unironic lesser of two evil arguments and yapping about fair trade, which is a laughable concept under the system of commodity production, and knowing of value chains and how unequal exchange works. I agree. But yeah, like I said, I think there's a lot of non-socialists usurping the name of anti-imperialism right now. And so, those people really, there's no meaningful anti-imperialism without socialism. So that, they're, quote, anti-imperialist, just meaning they're anti whoever they consider to be the worst imperialist. Some other comments that are pretty good going on in the comments. I'm not going to get into all of them right now. I'm very skeptical of Chinese socialism today, but I understand why well-meaning socialists who believe in China are doing so because they fundamentally believe that they represent a hope for non-white peoples of the planet who have been so beaten down by Europe, USA, Canada. I just understand that. Yeah. Counterpoint, let me just throw it out there. This whole discussion may be, I mean, it's great that we're starting to have more of this discussion, but, I put out a post a while ago on Twitter that was like, Xi Jinping thought, revisionist or no, why or why not? Just trying to engender some discussion. that was less of a as China socialist, and it's focusing on something a bit more specific, especially something that's criticizable in the English language, because The Governance of China was published in English in 2014, and there are other things about Xi Jinping thought specifically that are available in English and can be analyzed, and things like that. And it got retweeted by some apparent Chinese. Again, you don't really know who anybody is on Twitter, but there were Chinese language retweets of people basically saying, look at these U.S. Marxists. They're trying to decide if Xi Jinping thought is revisionist or not, whereas we in China are just trying to decide whether, which sort of form of grotesque, bureaucracy and I forget what else they said, but it was like, to them that was not a question anymore. It was just sort of which specific flavor of it, and it was so yeah. It's you understand the thing about, trying to think of how to phrase this, and I don't want to keep sputtering out 4 or 5 word phrases and then retracting them. There's a lot of, oh, you dumb, ignorant Westerner, you can't understand anything, you're racist, you see everything through your McDonald's and Burger King lens, and, just stay out of world affairs and let us do our thing. And I get why people, and, to a certain extent, yeah, nobody wants, like, U.S. chauvinism in there. But when actual Marxists try to do this analysis, that isn't from a chauvinist place. It's from a, is this actually socialist kind of place. And I think that there is still some things to be worked out in that regard. That, unless you're trying to say that being a Marxist and doing Marxist analysis is not possible if you live in the U.S., which I think is an absurd claim to make, that somehow it's impossible for Marxists in the U.S. to overcome chauvinism and racism to a point where you can even do honest analysis of economic development in certain other countries. I do think that that's an absurd position. That's not to say there isn't tons of chauvinism around. There absolutely is. But that's not really where the Marxist analysis is coming from. Say like a Vosch, for example. Not a Marxist, heavily critical of China, but more from a Democratic Party perspective. But again, that's not really what we're talking about. But when we get swayed by those things of shut up, sit down, Westerner, what do you know? Well, Marxism is universal. We risk falling way behind the curve. For example, that retweet that I mentioned where it was like, look at these Western socialists who are so far behind on the discussion of, is Xi Jinping thought revisionist? To us, the question is not, is it revisionist, just what particular kind it is. So, overcome your chauvinism, but also you are capable of analysis even if you do live in the West. There have been tomes written debating this, but the simple fact is, yes, China engages in at least some degree of unequal exchange. Financial capital is used to generate profits from extraterritorial production, where the cost of production is much lower. Yeah. China is imperialist, so is Russia. Both export capital to reap super profits, etc. Yeah, but look at the difficulty we're having with that conversation. People get thrown at least by the fact that there's still nominally at least a communist party in charge of China. There is no such excuse for Russia. You still have people just claiming that they're not imperialists somehow. But anyway, both China and Russia export capital to reap super profits, etc. They're just smaller imperialist blocs, like how Germany and Austria were smaller imperialist blocs in pre-World War I. This is not saying that the working classes have not seen some benefit, but the GDP, capitalism can bring benefit to working classes, but it's highly unequal. It brings the most benefit to capitalists. But the GDP per capita of this last quarter in the U.S. was $77,981. Are we actually seeing all of that benefit? Yeah, I can tell you for sure I did not make almost $80,000 last year. Most didn't. I mean, the entire switch from GDP, when they moved into the Dungist market reforms period, and then for a while after that, some of the only goals they were setting was increasing GDP, which is a terrible measure for socialism. So, I mean, many of the goals in the neoliberal turn in China were just oriented around GDP almost exclusively. Just increasing GDP. This continues to be a thing. Tell me what's socialist about that, or like, anyway. But these are just questions I rarely ever get good answers to. I think it's important to have this conversation not only as a proper analysis. Okay, let's try that again. I think it's important to have this conversation as not only as a proper analysis of the worldwide geopolitical situation on some level necessary to form even a local political program, but specifically one's attitudes towards the status of socialism in China is pretty fundamental to a lot of theoretical debates and generally can be used as a litmus test for anti-revisionism. Yeah, I fully agree with that. And also, so just to give you like a brief example, if what China is building is not socialism at all, why would any communist party embrace it as a model? Right? I think that sort of speaks for itself. So yeah, Europe trying to hop onto the BRI as they see the U.S. as a sinking ship. Yeah, this has been a lot of discussion about the U.S. Or the EU being kind of like a dependent of the USA and not being able to act independently of the U.S. And will Europe ever be sort of its own power again? And if not, maybe sort of jumping ship and going on with China. I mean, to a certain extent, you look at it, I got a brief flash in my mind of like, in a brief sense, it's like the Cold War is still going on, even in the post-communist period. Some of the attitudes, orientations, and alignments, it's like you still got the U.S. pounding it out with Russia in overt and covert forms. You've got Europe in the middle, obviously leaning towards the U.S. because that's been the historical alliance. Also, I mean, the foundation of the U.S. has its roots in Europe's colonialism. And then you have, sort of China somewhat on the outside of that, oversimplifying quite a bit. Um, I'm sure that this wouldn't hold up to extended scrutiny, but like I said, it's just a flash in my mind of like, still the U.S. and Russia fighting the Cold War. Europe is like, can we do something else here? And maybe wanting to abscond with China. I think you're right though overall, whether or not that sort of brief little flash has any meaning or not. But yeah, look at who's investing in the Belt and Road Initiative, and tell me how many socialist powers it is, or I'll wait for your thoughts on that. The unban requests are hilarious. Sal says, "Can you see those?" I don't even know. We have a good amount of people here in the chat. We lose one or two trolls every stream. Um, I agree they're hilarious. I try not to give it an undue amount of attention, but I would just say the pain I deal with reading these fucking comments. People who like jump onto the YouTube or whatever, start like posting some furious like pro Caleb Maupin comments or whatever, and then they get like surprised when I ban them or whatever. It's just I really, really, really try to be fair to people. Sometimes I just run out of patience. Like I hit my patience quota within a given week, and it's just like, sorry, I have a channel to run right now. Um, what's your favorite unban request? Some of them gotta calm down and just take the L. Yeah. No, we're not getting onto religion. We had a brief discussion of religion last time, and let me just tell you, the discussion. If you notice that the last stream ended a bit abruptly, it's because we got into about a 20-minute discussion of religion, and I was shocked at people's unreadiness to critically examine religion. Let me put it that way. I mean, even just from a basic, so it's not even specifically Marxist, but like a basic sociological, you know, some attempt to be objective about religion and its function in society and all that. I was just stunned, shocked, appalled, my jaw dropped at how unprepared so many people were to have any kind of objective analysis of religion. The whole discussion started out with a comment, and I tried so goddamn hard to like set it up, you know, from my U.S. based lens, where here this is like a Protestantism dominated country where Catholicism and Judaism and Islam have been oppressed to varying extents for varying periods of time, and et cetera, et cetera. I tried to set it up so well that I'm talking about the U.S. and not anything else. I tried to do nods to, you know, indigenous religions, if they can be called religions, because to some extent, yeah, it would fall under the heading of what we would consider religious or spiritual thought. They may not really have that much in common in form with like monotheism, like religion as we recognize it today. There's many kinds of religion. There's animism. There's polytheism. There's all kinds of things. Okay, so I was trying to like narrow it down to let's have a conversation about, you know, religion in Europe, religion in the United States, something that's actually relevant to the struggle that we're facing. You know, sort of like we're doing the homelessness industrial complex syllabus, trying to hone in on an issue that is relevant to the last few decades of the society where most of the audience is living. So it's like, you know, can we have a discussion about religion in a way that's relevant to class struggle? No. People wanted to take this in every other direction but that. I was honestly stunned. The entire conversation actually started with somebody saying, hey, I've been surprised, this commenter was saying, about the number of people I've run into who think that religion is compatible with a materialist perspective, or the amount of people who think it's stupid to say that religion is not really compatible with a materialist viewpoint of the world, of reality. And I would say, yeah, believing that gods are independent things that require our worship and so forth. I mean, how do you define religion? I mean, we can get into a lot of details, which I'm not going to bother with again this time. But yeah, I mean, if we roughly shape this as religion as distinct from philosophy or just any other ideology, as having a supernatural element of, you know, having a belief in gods particularly, or spirits, or some sort of unseen thing that is maybe even specifically not of this world, and so on. Yeah, I would say that that is highly anti-materialist. I mean, and again, whatever the caveat I was trying to give is that even from a materialist point of view, we do not have all the answers, because we exist in space and time. Time moves forward. We make progress with our scientific knowledge of the world, but we're never going to know everything at any given point in time. That's just not possible. It's progress that we make, and the point is that you can't use those holes in your knowledge that necessarily are going to exist. You can't use the holes in your knowledge to just try to use that as evidence for a God claim that doesn't hold up. Now, but that said, we have to do something with the fact that we don't know everything, and also that the universe is therefore at least somewhat mysterious, and beautiful, awesome, awe-inspiring, massive place that just blows our small human advanced monkey minds trying to think about the enormity of the universe. And so a lot of people try to ascribe this to like a god that is bigger than all of it. You know, yes, I would say it's fundamentally anti-materialist to take a view like that. It's not scientific at all. Your lack of understanding is not evidence for a god or anything that we don't actually have evidence of, etc. So the amount of directions that conversation went off in, I think that people, you know, to put it this way, we have discussions that we've been having here, such as, you know, is Russia imperialist? Having a big, you know, drag out fight about that on the channel for since the invasion of Ukraine. Talking about China today, people trying, you know, struggling so badly with questions like that, then unable to apply materialist analysis to religious claims. Come on, like, you know, at a certain point, you gotta catch up here. Anyway, just a few words about religion. My God, there's a Caleb Muppet emoji. Burger King. Yeah, you're right, Charmander. Vosh was quoted as saying, "The USA is more of a proletarian state than China ever was." If I lived in China and kept reading stuff like that, I'd tell Americans to shut the fuck up too. Yeah, that's exactly what I'm talking about. But then again, he's not a Marxist. Like, there's no analysis that goes into that. He's just like throwing around some buzzwords. It's also easy to see U.S. Western imperialism because it's so much more developed and it is dominant right now. You know, it's not the underdog. It is dominant. It's in your face. It's visible. GDP isn't just a terrible measure for socialism, but certainly a not very good measure for economic status in general. GDP per capita is actually not any better either. Yeah, that's very true. So you should publish them in videos with circus music. I did publish an infracell thing with circus music. It's called Enter the Gladiator, I think, is the name of the piece. That I used that in the We Are Currently Living in Socialism video. So way ahead of you on that one. But yes, we're of like mind there. Yeah, GDP is not a good measure in general, but they constantly use it. And you can find many explanations of this. But it's not a good measure, and yet everyone uses it as like the strength of the economy. Why do you think Cuba, for example, speaks so highly of the BRI, just economic necessity in light of the embargo? You know, I haven't read Cuba's statements on that specifically, so I can't critique them. Cuba, though, is in a very precarious position. It's like a lot of the countries that refused to vote against Russia, I think, in the invasion of the Ukraine in the UN. They need to have trade with some of these countries or they will just not survive at all. So this involves massive compromises. And I think if people, you know, it would bother me less personally, having to listen to all this. It would bother me a lot less if people at least acknowledge the compromises and be like, look, it's not socialism. They're just trying not to die so that maybe they can build socialism at some point. That would bother me less than a lot of this stuff. I mean, there's still things that you could, you know, argue with in that. But, you know, using it as like evidence of Russia's socialism or some shit, as I've seen, no. That means you have an incredibly naive propagandistic understanding of international relations. My favorite is, I thought this was socialism for all. Yeah, when people do that, they have officially lost. That is the dumbest thing ever. And yeah, the channel always will be for all because I can't like block people from looking at the channel, nor would I intend to. But I do not need to listen to every comment. That would be everyone's comments on socialism for all for me. That's not the channel. I would not be able to keep running this channel if I had to read every single one of these stupid comments. For me, actually, I've switched to a model of YouTube comment moderation where I unblocked most people, and now I have to manually approve comments. That's actually working better for me. So it's like, very few people are flat out banned, but I don't have to like deal with things getting published without my approval. That's just working a lot better so far. So if your comment doesn't appear for a couple days, it's because I haven't logged on to like approve comments. But yeah. It is better for Cuba to have some economic progress than for it to be like how it was after the fall of the USSR. Yeah. Yeah, I thought this was socialism for all. I've heard that I can't tell you 30 times, and it gets funnier every single time I hear it. I can respect the individual religiosity of fellow comrades, but yes, religion is unequivocally anti-materialist. It's undeniable. You know, and when you say respect the individual religiosity of people, I wouldn't even say I respect it. Honestly, for me, it probably decreases my view of somebody to find out that they're very religious, because it means to me that they're highly uncritical of a fair amount of their belief structure. That's not good, and I think it goes hand in hand with poor critical thinking skills across the board. Now, there may be specific reasons for that, of just like they had some experience that they can't explain or whatever. I still think casting in a religious light is not necessarily the answer to that. But as if you mean respect as far as tolerate, yeah, I mean I think that there's a certain amount of toleration for that. But you know what? This was one of the points too, that somebody DM'd me one time, and they were like, "Hey, you were talking bad about religion, but I'm in South America and my people follow this indigenous religion, and we get prejudice for it, and we get harassed by it." Guess who was harassing them? Catholics. So is religion the problem? Could be, because that sounded like interreligious fighting to me. So yeah. So if we mean, in other words, tolerating views, yeah, I guess so. I mean, as far as not being prejudiced against people in like a systematic, structural way, not denying people rights or opportunities because of it, yeah. I mean, that's fine. And what I was going to say is Albania, which made great strides in purging religious influences over their society. Today, even post-socialism, is one of the most religiously tolerant societies on earth. So getting rid of real belief in religion means getting rid of all the shit that goes along with true believers attacking non-believers. So yeah, I mean, it's like constantly portrayed as like, oh, Albania was this tyrannical place where you weren't allowed to believe what you wanted to believe. Turns out, actually, they managed to eradicate religious prejudice and have like a highly tolerant society that isn't driven by religious beefs. So yeah. On religion, I thought the point was in order to act and organize now, we have to form coalitions with the religious people who are sympathetic to socialism. I don't think that that was the point that kicked off last week's discussion at all. So no, I don't think that was it at all. Yes, bananas fit in my hand materially. God designed them for my hand. Sarcasm, please, no ban. Yes, so there is a. If anybody remembers the old '80s sitcom Growing Pains, Kirk Cameron, who was a moderately talented actor slash teen heartthrob, became a whacked out creationist in later years and produced a video, or participated in a video, that their argument for creationism was that bananas come in a natural wrapper that fits conveniently in your hand. I guess, ignoring pineapples and, like every other fruit that doesn't. But no, there is a. There is a fruit that fits in your hand and comes in a convenient wrapper, therefore God. Astounding. Excellent reasoning, my dude. Wonderful. And another comment, bananas fit in my ass, therefore they're a part of God's design. And don't forget carrots, I might add. Uh, Please avoid inserting bananas into holes that are not intended for bananas. Um, how do we know? You know, I communed with my creator the other day. Well, let me just tell you, he gave me some banana advice that conflicts with your banana advice. So I think that you and I should shoot at each other to prove whose God is correct. That's what I think. So anyway, no, I mean this is part of ruling class ideology. Period. We all remember the banana wars of the 1380s, in which it was well, never mind. Regarding what you were discussing earlier, bottom line, white U.S. Marxists such as myself must incorporate the critique of colonialism and settler colonialism, racism, chauvinism, Orientalism, etc., and dedicate our struggle to the eradication of such social ills. And we should individually be sympathetic to the personal ramifications of our comrades psychologically. But in actual analytical determinations, all that matters is rationality and science, not identity. Yeah, that's correct. And so when I say doing actual Marxism, yeah, I agree with you, and I mean that as a shorthand for those things don't factor into Marxist analysis. So therefore, I'm referring to people who have overcome those things and are not basing their analysis in that kind of chauvinism. So yeah, bigotry, etc. But if all continuing the comment, if all that is said is you don't know or can't have an opinion without any substance, this is critical as this can be said in good faith. This is not an argument. Yeah, I mean, that's liberalism. This must be recognized as such reasoning is sometimes used to forward revisionism. And that is the point. That is the point. Is that revisionism will sometimes hide behind accusations of racism. And they do this on all sides of it. I mean, you can see U.S. people hiding behind accusations of various kinds of bigotry to hide, well, not revisionism, but just to hide capitalism in general. You know, like you can point out, for example, that class collaboration along racial lines or gender lines isn't actually good for, you know, gender liberation, for example, etc. So yeah, capitalism certainly has learned to command some of these things. But as I always say, the problem with liberal idpol is not the idpol, it's the liberalism. We do have to overcome bigotry and sexism, racism. All of these things are used to underpin and to help to anchor capitalism. So you can't really undo capitalism without also addressing these topics also. You know, and this is kind of back on the subject of religion. So I was saying, is religion generally, like as in the majority of cases, more on the progressive side or more on the reactionary side in revolutionary moments, etc.? Look back at the USSR to some of Stalin's writings about. I'm trying to think of what piece this was in. I don't think it was Foundations of Leninism. It was one of the more recent ones that I did from Stalin. But anyway, he's talking about, you know, the reactionary mullahs and how the communists need to not fall into the trap of not fall into. He said it so. Let me see if I can find the thing because it's honestly it's worth quoting. Communists not falling into the trap of sort of turning a blind eye to reactionary trends in, quote, local customs and things like that, and that included religion and religious organizations when they are anti-communist, as they often are. Let's see, what Stalin work was this from? I'll probably, as soon as I see the title, know it. Loading. Let's see. Well, let's just try the view full playlist. All right. It was not anarchism or socialism. I want to say it was dialectical and historical materialism. I could be wrong about that. I want to say it was dialectical and historical materialism. Let me see. Dialectical and historical. Stalin. If it has the word mullah in it, then it was definitely that. And if it wasn't this, no, it wasn't that. Although I really thought it was this. Let's see. Okay, well. Well, we'll have to come back to that some other time. I don't know if it was against vulgarizing the slogan of self-criticism. I don't want to spend the entire rest of the stream just like looking through these, so I can bring it. I can find it for tomorrow's stream. No, where was my tab? All right. Yeah, we should probably start wrapping up at some point here. Can I see the fucking chat? Thank you, Twitch, for putting up random windows over my chat. All right, let's close that. But yeah, it is often, revisionism will often, and just counter-revolution in general, capitalism in general, will hide beneath that. Do you have a commenter that you don't deem so bad that you have to ban them, but have to sigh and slap your forehead and say, here you go, here we go, when you see their handle or username come up? Nobody that I deal with on kind of a chronic basis, no. But I guess there are certain people, there's no specific names coming to mind. I usually, like, before long, do end up blocking them or something like that. Because eventually, they usually don't take feedback very well. And so they usually get hostile sooner rather than later, as soon as I start engaging with them. So no, usually I don't have long-running relationships of the type. Usually they get brought to a head fairly quickly. And it's either somebody that, you know, I get along with and recognize as intelligent, or somebody that digs into their stupidity, like, you know, over 3 or 4 interactions until I just finally get sick of it. Yeah, so I think most of those people I've parted ways with some time ago. No, but there usually isn't a neutral middle ground, and especially over certain topics. Like, there were just certain topics I started blocking people over more and more frequently because I just didn't want to read it. Some of the China defenses, when I was seeing specific talking points being used on China defenses on Twitter recently, like in the last 4 months, I just started blocking because I was getting into fights with those people every single time. So there were certain things to me that were just sort of tells, as far as like, if so-and-so uses X or Y point of logic, then I'm going to get into an argument with them probably sooner rather than later. So I just started blocking. When you deal with thousands and thousands of people, sometimes you just have to take strategies like that. And once in a while, somebody decent gets caught up in that. But, you know, and I'll unblock. But those are the exceptions. Yeah, if I'm honest with myself, I also tend to judge religious people. Really what I mean is there's no reason not to organize and act with religious comrades. Again, though, I mean, talking about general tendencies here, it's sort of like the patriotism debate. It's, you know, I think religiosity, to a certain extent, it's on the decline in the U.S. Religiosity in general is on the decline in the U.S. And who is it more on the decline with? More progressively minded people or more reactionary people? So, you know, it's things like that you kind of need to be honest with. Are there going to be some actual communists who have some religious beliefs? Yeah. Are there going to be like fundamentalist Christians? Almost exclusively no. So I mean, you know, it's not always black and white. Like, there's certain, it's about tendencies, directions, and trends. So yeah. Anyway, but yeah, the thing I can't stand is people coddling decidedly reactionary, religiously based views and customs and things that communists should be fighting against on the basis of, oh, well, it's somebody's religion. Well, fuck that. It's just some outdated piece of ruling class ideology that they've picked up. This is really no different from like, well, you know, I met some working class person in the U.S. who espouses the same views as Sean Hannity because he watches Fox News all the time. Therefore, it's a working class view and we must respect it. No, it's ruling class ideology that somebody picked up uncritically and is now espousing it. I had this insanely bourgeois notion regarding free speech. I watched your video on how to start a channel, and it helped me to realize how your discussion and education really have to be primary. Free speech is pointless unless you defend the revolutionary point of view and protect those spaces for their open discussion about revolution. So yeah, censorship for the win. I think of it like a classroom. Um, in a classroom where you're there to learn about, I don't know, say calculus, if somebody gets up on the desk, like moons the class, takes a dump on the desk, and starts talking about comic books, that is undermining the ability of everyone to learn and have a discussion about calculus. So it's not even limited to, revolution. But I mean, it's the same principle. And especially in a culture and climate so hostile to discussions of socialism. A lot of people have anti-communist views. And so, we have to be extra sharp on that kind of thing. Yes, the banana creationism argument was Ken Ham, but he made a video with featuring Kirk. What's his name? I keep wanting to say Kirk Hammett, but that's very different. You know what the hell I'm talking about? The Growing Pains kid. Hakeem said like 2 years ago that he's writing a book on how Islam is compatible with Marxism. Honestly, made me cringe a bit. Haven't seen anything recently on it. Sadly, I'd love to read it. I wouldn't. My guess is that Islam is compatible with communism if you throw out most of it, which is what religious people usually do anyway. It's cherry picking your beliefs out of some text that was written centuries, millennia ago, was ruling class ideology from a very long time ago, has been bastardized and distorted in multiple retranslations and interpretations over centuries, and it's fucking garbage anyway. The Ken Ham video is hilarious on multiple levels. The broken logic, even if what he was saying was correct, the fact that it's not correct and that modern bananas are literally the product of evolution, albeit artificial, and of course the intense sexual undertones of the entire display. Yeah, I think the banana squirts at one point. Like, there's very weird things going on there. But also, yeah, bananas are just one fruit, but wild bananas usually are much smaller. Like the bananas we eat in the US, the 10-inch yellow ones, that's not really like, a lot of bananas are much shorter, like 4 or 5 inches, and they're brown. And, the fact that it fits in your hand is no more remarkable than, an apple fits in your hand. So yeah, I mean, just all of that, so bizarre. It's the product of evolution, but it's not the product of like even evolution with human beings. It's not like maybe in the modern age, humans selected bananas to be larger, just as many products like carrots. You look at a wild carrot. So if you know Queen Anne's lace, it's a common roadside weed. Has little white flowers in an umbel shape. Those are wild carrots, and they have little tiny whitish tan roots that are like maybe 2 inches long. If you scratch the root, they smell intensely like carrot, like a much stronger smell than the big like foot long orange carrots. They're also not nearly as sweet. So I mean, there's an example of humans found something that kind of smelled good, was usable as like an ingredient in things because it had flavor that was pleasant, and then grew them, selected them over a long period of time to be much bigger and sweeter, and other things that are the traits that we're looking for as human beings in our food. I read an article about psychedelics by Martin Luther King Jr. That's a new one on me. And I felt after his career as a reverend and his open preaching of liberation, theological type stuff seemed to be a means to an end. Christianity wasn't a belief per se, but a tool for movement. Well, then guess what? It's not really Christianity anymore. You know? There comes a point with religion where you either believe in the God or you don't. And at that point, this is what we were saying last time. You don't need morality, or you don't need a God to be moral. You don't need a God to be ethical. And if your, quote, religion, it doesn't actually have a God or spirits or anything like that involved in it, it's not really a religion anymore. It's just more of a philosophy or ideology. Um, yeah, if you're taking out the God claim, is it still a religion? And so at that point, you're just sort of making a moral argument for socialism, which fine, but is it Christianity at that point? Is that really an honest statement? Let alone that Christianity, basically it holds that the Bible is true and all that stuff about eating shellfish and whatever, clothes of two different fabrics or whatever the fuck. I mean, if you're a Christian, that should be real to you. If it isn't, then you're picking and choosing. To a certain extent, people like, the extreme fundamentalists, it's like they're the ones that are actually holding to the book. Now, the text contradicts itself multiple times. They don't seem to care that their beliefs are contradictory, but they at least make the attempt to stick to it. And, I don't respect or admire the results. I don't really, there's many better things that they could be doing with their lives, but it's at least a more honest implementation. Whatever other horrific things come out of it, it's at least a more honest implementation of the religion. So, anyway. Yeah, we mentioned this a little bit too, the Unitarian Universalists. It reminds me of the Universalists. But at that point, when you've stripped all the actual supernatural claims from religion and just have community organization and some leftover aesthetics, how appealing is it really to, quote, actual religious people? Yeah, exactly. And so they'll reject that, religion as sort of some sort of blasphemy or something like that. I think the thing is that people find the world beautiful and awe-inspiring, and they want to believe in some sort of like the goodness within people, and they oftentimes will refer to those things as they have like religious feelings out of that, like transcendent feelings of enormous beauty, like they feel carried away by something bigger than themselves. I mean, all of that, it's kind of an illusion of your consciousness. That's not to say it's not a wonderful experience. And, contemplating the enormity and beauty, but also the, infinite coldness and hostility to life of most of the universe as well. These are profound things that can really make the mind boggle and, realize your actual smallness as a human being in this world and give you a sense of humility and stuff like that. But, again, it's not evidence for a God claim. I agree with you about religion, but I'm curious of your thoughts on Satanism. Well, so, I mean, there's more to the comment, but off the bat, Satan is part of Judeo-Christian mythology, so if you reject that, you're going to reject that as well, because it's part of it. But anyway, if you know anything about them, that is, like they don't believe in anything supernatural. Well, there's different kinds of Satanists. Some of them are just trolling. And, I feel like at that point, be an atheist or something. That's kind of my point of view on that. Some Satanists today don't actually believe in Satan, and they're just sort of trolling fundamentalist Christians and stuff like that. And it's like, okay, I'm all for antagonizing reactionaries. There's probably a better way you can do it, though. This kind of like edgelord stuff isn't really constructive at all. Just be a communist instead. You can drop that kind of weird stuff, really. As far as I mean, it's like terrorizing Christians. I mean, in a somewhat amusing way. Like you're not actually harming them in any way, but you're just sort of pretending to be the thing that their religion tells them to be afraid of, which is fictional. But it's kind of like if somebody believed in the Harry Potter books a lot, and then you pretended to be a follower of Voldemort or something like that. I mean, that would also be kind of funny to watch because it's people getting worked up about something that is clearly not real. So, like, I get it as sort of, I guess you could make a funny internet video. As sort of actual social activism, not so much. So, yeah, they see Satan as a metaphor and is highly critical about fusing church and state and so on. I think that some of those people may actually have more attachments to Christianity than they're willing to admit. Otherwise, they probably would become atheists. And you can criticize religion, you can criticize separation of church and state or the fusion of church and state. You can criticize all kinds of things without pretending to be a fictional religious antagonist. You can just be an antagonist to those things in real life. So I don't think there's any real need for that in most cases. And yes, Charmander, correct. The biggest Satanist church in the U.S. is kind of a libertarian neoliberal project. As I understand it, they're very materialistic in the bad way. Yeah, this is kind of a problem with a lot of the new NU atheists, is they're like libertarians, which in a way, they're almost getting their atheism from back in like the, Enlightenment era. Because in many ways, the founders of the U.S. were like more progressive on religion and atheism and all that stuff than, than a lot of the stuff today, which again, it's ruling class ideology. So it's being promoted in those mega churches alongside U.S. flags and stuff to basically just promote capitalism. Although like evangelical stuff and stuff like that, it's freedom. We believe in freedom. We're Christians and it's freedom and we're free. And really, all of this is just trying to sell people on capitalism. At the end of the day, a lot of the people pushing this stuff don't believe in God, Jesus, any of that stuff, Satan, etc. They're just using it for gullible rubes to get them to support their neoliberalism, basically. But even like a lot of the new atheist types, they'll be libertarians a lot of the time. And that's crap because come to communism, we have better atheism. Yeah, and I think there are some supernatural believing Satanists as well. I mean, these are pretty negligible parts of the population. But yeah, like I said, I think a lot of these people may have more attachments to the Christianity that they're trying to rebel against than they maybe want to let on or admit to themselves even. Excellent point on the extremity of the religiosity being critical. As for a fundamentalist religion and associated traditions must be outright rejected. I was more talking about good comrades who just kind of happen to believe in God. For most of those people, it's probably never going to come up in conversation. Like, it might be just a private thing in their lives. They might not even ever talk about it. It might not really influence any of their decisions. In which case, it doesn't matter. I mean, literally, it has no effect has no bearing on the world, on their decisions, etc. It might just be like they hold out the possibility that there could be some, supreme being that we just can't see for what it is or whatever. It's more of an agnostic position, I guess. So, or, somebody believes in God. And again, I think that that's more of a lack of, there's, for people who are actually brought up in religious environments, there can be, they can be taught that it's sacrilegious even to think critically about religion or to try to, examine it, analyze it sociologically. And for those people, they may have moved on in some ways, but they never maybe have turned that sort of laser beam onto their religious beliefs because they're afraid to. And I'm not trying to say that as some personal failing, but it's just they have been conditioned with a lot of superstition and respect for this thing. You're never supposed to question it. It's unholy even to question it. And so they maybe move on without ever questioning it. So they retain that belief, but it's just for lack of ever turning the critical analysis beam towards it. I can tell you it doesn't hold up for long when you do turn the beam on it. And also for a lot of people that can be very disappointing. Speaking about people wanting to believe Russia or China is socialist or whatever, we can see that as a real world based. People have all kinds of wishful thinking is the point. And some people want to hold out some hope that there is a God, and they fear that thinking more critically about it might lead them to a place of despair. This can be tied in with really deep rooted psychological stuff about family figures, but I do think it's incumbent on people who are actually communists and actually believe in ruthless criticism of all that exists to do that. That's not to say that it's always psychologically easy or that you're not going to have ups and downs in your life as a result of doing this critical analysis. It can really shake up your belief system in ways that people aren't always prepared for, but we should support each other as communists in doing that. GMOs are cool. Yeah, most of the GMOs that are done are for increased pesticide use, and we could have much better ways of ensuring good crop yields. A lot of them can be grown in other ways with comparable yields, and if money was actually put into that rather than property rights for the agribusiness companies, then we could do that without GMOs. Probably in most cases, and people always want to roll out the example of golden rice that has the vitamin A in it. Vitamin A, it's incredibly easy to get your daily vitamin A. Eating like one carrot or like half a sweet potato will do it. If you're actually deficient in vitamin A, you're just suffering from general malnutrition, and having golden rice is not really going to change that. So rather than spending however much money was spent to develop the golden rice, it would have been far, far, far easier to just not fucking starve those people in the first place. Yeah. Wow. There used to be in the 50s a strain of straight, uncurved bananas, which taste like the banana flavored candies still taste like. I love those because it's a monocrop, a blight wiped out the entire species. Send me a link on that. I want to read about that. Yes, the book that was written over 2,000 years ago, translated and retranslated many times over, I will add with political interests in mind, and has had things changed or removed as a true story, sure. Satanism is just Ayn Rand for edgy teenagers. Um, yeah, I mean, it in a roundabout way, yes. If you look at some of the literature, it's about selfishness and about being able to sort of dominate other people and the interest of the self as being at the middle of it. It doesn't necessarily talk about capitalism, but it's largely about selfishness. And it's not a huge leap from there. I mean, again, just look at how these things actually play out in the real world. What's the overlap between interest in that kind of thing and the far right? Okay, it doesn't take a genius to see. Yeah, I kind of chuckle as a former religious person as a child at the way some people describe the feeling of the Holy Spirit or whatever. It's a feeling very easily replicated by any number of social occasions, concerts, or even drugs. Can you develop this ruthless criticism? Yeah, that is what Marxism is all about, and it is the main skill we're trying to to develop. Yeah, Marx in 1843, in a letter, I will get you the full quote. Where is it? In 1843, let's see, Marx, quote, clear that what we have to accomplish at present. I'm referring to ruthless criticism of all that exists, ruthless both in the sense of not being afraid of the results it arrives at, and in the sense of being just as little afraid of conflict with the powers that be. So it's kind of this, analyze everything critically, scientifically, and let the chips fall where they may. It might lead to conclusions that shake you up. It might lead to conclusions that shake up society and lead to conflict with the existing powers. But we must not shrink from it, and that was it. All right, actually, I think that is a great note to end on today, and a much more satisfying resolution to the aborted religious conversation that we had last time. So we're going to leave it there for today. Thanks to everybody who showed up, and we will do that article I was talking about and probably some of the other readings that came up in tomorrow's stream. But I really appreciate that. That last stream honestly kind of bummed me out. I was walking around for like a couple hours, honestly, after the stream, being like, I can't believe how unready people were for that religion conversation. It shocked me and stunned me. But are we Marxists? What are we here? Are we materialists? What's going on? It's just, I was, whoa. But yeah, that was much better today. And we will pick it up tomorrow, Thursday, which I guess is December 1st. It sure is. And we'll be streaming at 1 p.m. Pacific, 4 p.m. Eastern, here at twitch.tv/socialism S4A. Thanks again to the people who showed up in the chat, because this was a great chat. It was a little slow at first, then it really got going. You helped to make these sessions what they are, and it's always great to just get some discussion going. I really appreciate it. Also, thanks to the people on YouTube. We'll see you in the comments, and what? I don't even know. Everything was flowing up to that point, and we'll see you next time. Okay, bye.